Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday. It is wow, it's just like a white day out there. Can't see any mountains. It's like the mountains have been deleted. Yeah, weekend's coming up.
Yes.
One more day. What are you going to do on the weekend?
Relax again.
Relax again?
Do my schoolwork.
Do your what?
Homework.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Avtej, what are you going to do?
Nothing, it's too cold.
Too cold?
Yeah.
Well, the weekend I think is going to be a little nicer.
I'm just not used to
Just nice. Yeah, I guess it's a little bit colder than you're used to, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. David?
I think I will clean my house on the weekend so I can move on to get a house next month.
Okay, you're gonna move next month?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Because currently I'm living in Surrey.
Yeah,
It's quite far from here.
it is quite far. Are you in homestay or
Wait,
you're in a basement? So you're just by yourself then?
here by myself.
Okay. But yeah, that's a long, I'm sure the rent is cheaper, but it's a long,
So I'm gonna move to George Station.
Yeah.
George Station.
yeah, that'll be a much shorter, yeah, because that's probably 20 minutes? 25 minutes from here? Joyce?
To Surrey or?
No, from Joyce to like the college.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, 25 minutes.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I used to live just on the other side of the railway tracks over here. So it was like a 12-minute walk here. So good.
Whoa.
Yeah. But now I live way out there. It's about an hour away, but that's okay. Worth it. Actually, my fiance and I think this weekend are going to go out and see if we can find a place to get married. Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna do that. We have a place in mind. We're just gonna go look at it and see what it looks like. See if it looks nice enough.
But don't you wanna get married like in the summer?
Well, we will get married in the summer, but we're just gonna look at it now to see if it works, and then we'll have to book it. But yeah, I think we're gonna do that this weekend. So that'll be exciting, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into where we were. Where were we anyway? Yes. Oh yeah. We were doing this thing. I really want to do this. This is you're banging your head on the desk, but why are you banging your head on the desk? You can tell me. It's okay. It's okay? You're good? Okay. So we were talking about how Western nations, particularly Britain and France, they appease Hitler, right? And so Hitler starts to violate the Treaty of Versailles. He starts to break all kinds of rules. He stops making reparation payments, stops paying off foreign debts, starts to build up Germany's military, takes over parts of Europe that were used to be Germany's but are not. Very soon he's going to take over part of Czechoslovakia, and Britain and France are not really going to do anything, right? And we mentioned that in terms of both Britain and France, they're kind of consumed with their own domestic issues. They have economic problems. You know, it's still the Great Depression. It's really bad in the US, but it's bad for other places as well. And again, nobody really wants to think about another European conflict, right? World War I is still fresh in everyone's mind. Nobody wants to go back there. Nobody has any money. And people just kind of like, ugh, nothing's going on over there. Just give him what he wants. It's fine. Nothing's happening. I see nothing. Right? They're trying to ignore it. But of course, we know enough to know that they're not going to be able to ignore him too much longer, but they do anyway. And so I asked you to read this article yesterday because I want to see if we can, number one, can we determine what the argument in this article is? And that's important, okay? And second, is this one of those things where we should learn from history, right? Everybody, when we talk about history, we always talk about how those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right? Or, we need to study history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past or something like that, right? We hear about that. And so is this a situation where we can learn something from the past or not? Or is this argument trying to say that? And does it say that, okay? And again, this is important. I really want to make sure that we can do this, right? Like we need to be able to read something, especially if it's kind of an opinion piece or if it has an argument, and we need to be able to figure out what that argument is, how it's constructed, is it a good argument, and should we believe it? We need to be able to do that because increasingly it seems that people can't do that, right? People look at information they find online and they can't tell the difference between good information and bad. They can't tell the difference between good arguments and bad ones, right? And it's a problem, right? It's a big problem. Did you see any of that trucker protest when you were in Ottawa?
No, but when I was in downtown, and then I went back to the hotel and I was supposed to go back to downtown. The Uber drivers like, don't, because we get stuck all the roads are blocked.
Yeah.
It's bad.
It's bad. It is bad, right? It is bad, and it seems like, I don't know, it seems like they're just sitting there and nobody knows what is going to happen with them. I kind of thought that they would get bored and eventually go home because they have no plan to do anything, but hopefully it won't get worse. Anyway, I do really want to do this. So, where were you as of yesterday? Did you'd probably read the whole article because it was pretty short. We came up with the conclusion of the article, right? Avatej, you said, what did you say? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. So here's what I would like you guys to do. I'm going to give you about 6 or 7 minutes. Online people, you can do this at home too. But you three in class, work with each other and try to figure out what this argument is, okay? We need to know what's being argued, and we need to know what are the supporting points, right? And so remember, we had a conclusion. Avatej, you're going to remember it very shortly, I'm sure. And then once we remember that conclusion, we want to ask ourselves, why should we believe that, right? What are the reasons that support what these guys want us to believe, okay? Okay, I'm going to put some time on the clock. I'm going to put 6 minutes because that sounds about right to me. Very arbitrary, I know, but I want you to see what you can do, okay? Conclusion, premises, okay? People at home, do the same thing. Figure out the conclusion of this argument and the premises, things that support it, okay? And then in 5 minutes, we'll talk. I'll give you the full 6 minutes. There we go.
That's what we say.
No, no, no.
I don't know what it
Nightmare?
is.
I don't know, I don't know. Cover pronunciation. Use mercenary as a
But yeah. But we get real. I don't. Why is Canada doing this? Because Canada can do nuclear more than Europe. Yeah, nuclear is just Europe. Canada is doing that too. You know what you know what to do? Hate it. That would be so fun. That would be good.
History teaches us that appeasement to avoid conflict with effective authoritarians only leads to massive conflict around the corner.
So if you avoid it, you will be happy.
It's basic, yeah. So like, it's the key about moving towards
You just
principle.
come from the future.
No. I just came from home
What do you have to buy?
since I had gym stuff inside. So what are you doing now?
So we're discussing the determine the alternate.
Okay, so want to give this a shot? Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to mock you there. But let's Well, let's give this a shot. Let's work out what we think, okay? Let me just check my notes from yesterday. Right, okay. Okay, so, dazzle me. So, Avatej, I think you remembered the conclusion, right?
Yeah.
What's the conclusion?
Canada should get involved in the situation between Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, and maybe even more than involved, but
But
maybe,
like be quiet with it.
yes, but even stronger than that, I think. So we need to support our NATO allies, and what do we need to do? We just stand up against Russia, right? So it's not just, oh, we're going to be there, right? Or we'll, participate somehow. But they're saying we need to actually stand up against this aggression, right? We need to stick with our NATO allies, and we need to push back, right? We need.
Is Canada part of NATO?
Yes.
But isn't NATO just for European countries?
No. So it started out that way, right? So NATO, we haven't gotten to this yet, but NATO is formed, I think it's in 1948 or 50, don't quote me on it, but it's to oppose Soviet aggression. It starts out with a few European nations. Basically all the other Western European nations join, as does Canada, the US. I think Canada and the US are the only NATO members outside of Europe. It was for the protection of Europe, but Canada and the US are members as well. So yeah, we signed on, I think, in 1948 or 50. So we've been part of NATO for a long time. So, okay, so Canada, with its NATO allies, needs to stand up to Russia, to keep them from doing what they want to do with Ukraine. So again, good critical thinkers, why should we do that? Why should we believe that? What reasons do the authors give us?
Because Russia violated international law.
Okay, that's a good one. Nice premise, right? Why should we stand up against Russia? The authors point out that the Russian government, Vladimir Putin, has violated international law, right? He invaded another country and took a piece of it, right? And was that in 2015? Is that what they said? Or 2016? It's okay. It's a few years ago, but Russia actually took a piece of Ukraine and kept it. And nobody kind of did anything at the time, but they did, right? They took a piece of another country. Can you what? Can you do? Okay. Okay. So good first premise, right? Russia has violated international law. Good reason to stand up to them here. What's another premise?
I think, like Regina had it, but
Okay.
the historians have taught us that avoiding conflict just leads to another conflict in own corners.
Right. So that's the historical lesson part, right? Is that when we appease authoritarians or when we appease dictators, maybe we don't have to, maybe there aren't serious consequences now, but inevitably there's going to be more serious consequences, right? We might do it now to avoid a conflict, but the conflict will get worse later on. Avatej stole your premise, Regina. Sorry, but you left, so what could he do? Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus there, Avatej. Right, so that's the historical lesson, right? When we appease someone to avoid conflict, it only leads to a greater conflict down the road, right? It only gets worse later. That's good. What's another premise? I think there's 5 premises in this one, but those are definitely 2. What's the third one? And online people, you can pop them in the live chat too. That would help. That would help us. Even if you're not entirely sure, throw it out there. We've definitely got 2 of them, which is great.
I don't know, I think that sounds pretty similar to the second one.
Okay.
Maybe. Previous events have demonstrated that the authoritarian regime trample on the rights of democracy.
Yeah.
With repercussions, they are emboldened
Yeah.
to act on threats elsewhere.
Right. I think that's a premise too, and you're right. It does sound a little bit like the one we just talked about, and maybe I think it's. I don't think it's kind of restating that first premise. I think it is a little different because the author, what do they talk about after they say that? After they say when autocratic regimes trample on the rights of democracies without repercussion, they are emboldened to act on threats elsewhere. I think this is a little different. And what do they talk about after that?
Whereas in 1929, those threats were contained initially to Europe. Today, an aggressors which can be global using conventional military forces, but also the modern weaponry and cyber warfare.
All right. So I actually think that's another premise, to be honest. Yeah, I think that's so. Kind of what I was going for there is when you talked about autocratic regimes being emboldened to act on threats elsewhere, I kind of think they were talking about China and Taiwan. And so I think the idea there was that, yeah, if an autocracy, if a country with a single leader, if Vladimir Putin gets his way with Ukraine and nobody stands up to him, that Xi Jinping in China is going to look at Taiwan and say, I want that, and I don't think anyone's going to stop me, right? Because nobody stopped Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. So I'm probably safe to do what I want with Taiwan, and nobody will stop me, right? So again, if we don't stand up in one place, other authoritarians will be emboldened, right? They'll feel more confident to do what they want in other places because they'll think that we won't stand up to them, right? So again, I think it's similar to that original one, but I think it's also different. So I think that's a premise. And I think what you just said was another premise as well, right? The idea, you said that cyber warfare, today an aggressor's reach can be global using conventional military force, but also cyber warfare. So assuming that, a conflict is just going to happen, in one geographic spot, it's not true, right? And probably, in 1938 or 39, that's probably what Britain was hoping for, right? Oh, that's just a European problem, right? It's definitely what the US was probably thinking, right? They're like, oh, that's Europe, that's way over across the ocean, who cares? Doesn't affect us, right? But now, because of cyber warfare, we can have attacks from anywhere to anywhere in real time, right? So, and interestingly, as soon as we started to indicate that we might support Ukraine, Canadian institutions and government websites started to be hacked by the Russians. Yeah. So as soon as we showed that we were going to stand up, we started getting hit, right? Not with bombs, but with cyber attacks, right? And so again, we can't believe that just because something is happening in Ukraine doesn't mean that it's not going to spill over to other places, right? Because they don't have to send bombs over here. They can just start attacking our our cyber infrastructure, right? So again, something that seems far away really isn't, right? It's the click of a mouse. It's the click of a mouse away, right? For the Russians anyway, and for us, but things are a lot closer than they used to be. There's one more, I think, and it's connected to the first premise. Russia has violated international law.
Is it the
Russia has violated international law and what?
I'm not sure, but
Okay.
in the recent report suggesting that Russia could deploy forces to Venezuela and Cuba in the event that hostilities reminds us that Canadian must rely on our Arctic regional defenses. Oh, Russia is heavily armed neighbor and potential threat, believing that conflicts can be regionally contained may be dangerously naive.
Oh, okay.
Is that-
I think that was part of, I think, the other premise, right? Although I was kind of focusing on the cyber warfare, but
Oh.
I think it's still the idea that, you know, just because it's happening in Ukraine doesn't mean that we will be isolated from it, right?
Mhm.
Yes, it's far away, it's on the other side of the planet, but it doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, Russia is not too far away to strike us if they want, right? First with cyber warfare, but also, yeah, they could deploy weapons to Venezuela, to Cuba. They are right that way, right? If you go over the Arctic, you will run into Russia, right? They're over there. And so they're not really that far away from Canada, right? So it's a small world, I think, is what that whole premise is about. Cyber wise, but also weapons wise, small world, right? So yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think it's part of that other premise. But I think there's one more that has to do with Russia violating international law. They violated it, and something about international law. Something about international law. This is good, though. We're getting it. We've only got one more.
Does it have to do with the reinforcement?
It might have to do some with that. What are you looking at there, Regina?
Wait, there's so many information.
I know.
Does it have to do something with unlawful invasion?
I don't think so. What does the unlawful invasion thing say?
Just asking, is it like military
Hmm.
or
Tell you what, why don't I help you with this one? Okay? So because we've got 4 out of 5, that feels pretty good for me. So here's what I thought when I read it, and again we've nailed, actually if you count the conclusion it's 5 out of 6, which is pretty good. This is how I thought it looked, right? That was the conclusion that Avatej suggested yesterday, and I think it's correct, that Canada with NATO needs to firmly oppose Russia's actions toward Ukraine. And again, why should we believe that, right? Why should we believe that that's the right thing to do? And so I think the authors give us 5 reasons to believe this, okay? Number 1, like you told me, yeah, Russia has broken international law, okay? The second one, and this is connected to it, I color-coded them because I think they kind of, some of these premises kind of go together. They're kind of in the same area. So yeah, a rules-based international order can only be sustained by firm and focused policy and consistency by democracies and middle powers such as Canada, right? So Russia violated international law, and if we want an international order that is based on rules, not just whatever anyone wants to do, but if we want people to actually follow the rules, we have to actually stand up when people try to break them, right? If somebody breaks the rules and we don't try to stop them or oppose them, well, good are the rules, right? With no punishment, with nobody holding anyone else accountable, the rules don't mean anything. And suddenly, we're the only ones following them, right? If we follow them. So I think those two go together, right? You told me, of course, that appeasement to avoid conflict with aggressive authoritarians only leads to more serious conflicts around the corner, right? We avoid a fight today, but that just means that, something else, a bigger fight is coming down the road, right? Here, when autocratic regimes trample on the rights of democracies, they are emboldened to act on threats elsewhere, right? So again, if Vladimir Putin gets his way and is able to take over part of Ukraine or just influence their choices or just keep them out of NATO, whatever he's trying to do, then other authoritarians will think that they can get away with whatever they want as well, right? And we've got authoritarians in Belarus, we've got authoritarians in China, we've got authoritarians in North Korea, and other places as well, right? And they'll look at this example and they'll say, well, nobody's going to stop us, right? Xi Jinping can take over Taiwan, and the Americans will stomp their feet and, issue grouchy tweets, but they won't do anything, right? So we can do what we want, right? And then again, the idea that we can't pretend that this is a local thing, right? You could say, well, I don't care about, that's Ukraine, right? I don't care about Ukraine. That's a long way from where I am. Doesn't matter to me. But it's a small world, right? Maybe today the Russians want to influence what Ukraine does. Maybe tomorrow they want Canada to do something, right? And then maybe they're putting the pressure on us, right? And they can do it. They're close enough to use weapons, and they're definitely close enough to cyber attack us, right? And they've been doing that, right? They interfered in both U.S. presidential elections, the one where Trump won and the one where Biden won. They've tried to get involved in our federal elections. They've tried to get involved in elections in France and in Britain. They're not far away, right? They're a Wi-Fi connection away. And so conflicts aren't localized anymore, right? What's happening in Europe can easily spill over into other places, especially because we're so connected, right? Far more than we were in 1937 or 8 or 9. So, do you think we have a good argument here? Let's see, are all these premises true? Did Russia violate international law?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that the only way to keep a rules-based order is to hold people accountable when they break the rules? I think that's pretty.
Depends really,
Yeah, but I mean, if you want people to follow the rules, you have to punish people when they break them. Otherwise, nobody will follow the rules.
Well, why doesn't China or India or Pakistan get involved?
Why are they staying out of it?
Yeah,
Good question.
they're quite big too.
They are quite big.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so China's staying out of this because I think China supports Russia, right? But Russia is not the stronger power here. China is. And so, if you think about it, Austria-Hungary started World War I, and they had the much stronger backing of Germany, right? And Germany said, yeah, we support you, and they got pulled in. And I don't think Xi Jinping wants to get pulled into this. I think he supports Vladimir Putin, but I don't think he cares too much about Ukraine, and so he's not going to stick his neck out, right? He's not going to become involved because it doesn't mean anything to him. And that's probably what India's position is as well. It doesn't mean anything to them, so they're ignoring it. But yeah, there's other powers that could step up as well, but so far haven't, right? But again, if you want everybody to obey the rules, you have to hold people accountable to them, right? If there's no penalty for breaking the rules, nobody will follow them. People will just do whatever they want. And that's probably true of anything, right? Would you say that's true? Yeah. Appeasement in order to avoid conflict with aggressive authoritarians only leads to more serious conflict around the corner. Do you think that's true? Yeah, right? We don't have a crystal ball, right? We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we definitely have historical examples where that's happened, right? We've appeased people, and then a bigger fight came down the road, right? Things got much more ugly later on. So is it true? Well, it has been true in the past, for sure. When autocracies trample on the rights of democracies, they might be emboldened to act elsewhere. You could see how that might be true, right? Again, it's the rules thing, right? If people break the rules and there's no consequence, nobody will follow the rules, right? Why bother? And would you say that it's a small world? Yeah, that we're a lot closer to people than we used to be. Yeah, right. Our military technology, well, if we look since 1939, our military technology has vastly improved, right? Our communications have vastly improved, and the world is much more interconnected than it used to be. It's a smaller world now than it was in 1938 or 39, right? Anything that happens somewhere else is going to affect us here in one way or the other, right? We're too closely connected now. We can't pretend that, oh, that's Ukraine, right? That's a long way away, right? Because it's not. So all of these premises are probably true, or at least mostly true, or we have historical evidence that points that way. I think they're all logical support for the conclusion, right? They're all reasons why we would want to oppose such an action. So maybe what I'll ask you now is, do you agree with this argument? Do you agree with their conclusion that we need to stand up to Russia?
No.
No? Why not?
Because it's more of a EU problem.
Okay.
It's that continent.
Yep.
And they should deal with it themselves. The countries of that continent.
Okay.
Other countries in other continents should just stay out of it. In fact, they should just use that money to protect themselves.
Okay.
If a threat comes to them, instead of getting involved and putting money into it. And they're Russia, so you're probably going to lose. So yeah.
So your position here is that this is a European problem, and it should have a European solution.
Yeah.
North America should worry about North American stuff, and so in a way you're kind of rejecting that last premise, right? Because the authors are saying it's a small world, and you're saying, well, not so much, right? It actually is a separate thing, and it shouldn't be our problem. Okay, all right, fair. David, what do you think? Do you agree with this argument or not? Still thinking? All right, I'm going to come back to you. Ryan, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? And online people too. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree.
You agree?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because it makes sense.
Because it makes sense?
Yeah.
In what way does it make sense?
Like,
Or what kind of like stands out most for you?
because Putin is he's like a single leader, so history has taught us like what a single leader can do.
Right.
Yeah, so history might repeat itself, but there's a chance.
Right. So that's interesting because for Avatej, it's kind of premise 5 is standing out as incorrect, right, to you, and so you're saying, yeah, I'm rejecting this argument because I don't buy the fact that that's true, right? Whereas for Ryan, that premise number 3 is really standing out, right? It's really pushing you into supporting the argument because you're saying, yeah, we've seen this before, right? We know how this goes, right? Okay, Regina, what do you think?
I'm more on a, I would say like maybe 70% agree.
Okay.
I mean, like, yeah, I wouldn't really want to stick like close into other people's business too.
Yeah.
But looking back into history, like what Ryan said, it might repeat itself.
Yeah.
We do have an example of what happened if we appease an authoritarian leader too much.
Yep.
And Russia is already quite strong.
Yep.
So if we keep appease, like let them be, or like they keep getting stronger, it might get worse.
Right.
In the future. So.
Right. Yeah, so that third premise is kind of standing out to you, right, in terms of being true, but also, and maybe something that hasn't really come up in this argument, the idea of, when should we involve ourselves in a country's domestic affairs, right? Although this is technically an international thing, right, because one country is threatening another, right? So this is an international thing. It's not just within a country, but still, we're not really part of it, right? Canada's not, directly involved. And so, yeah, when should we stick our nose in other people's business, and when should we just let people sort it out? And Avitesh, I think that's kind of what you're saying too, right? Is how do we decide what's our business and what isn't?
Maybe if it gets like too serious.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't let it get too serious.
like they're gonna attack like European countries, Britain and all that, then maybe to get involved.
Right.
But right now it's too far away.
Right. And again, I'm not disagreeing with you here, but that does sound very familiar to what Britain and France were thinking prior to World War II, right? They were thinking, yeah, let's just give this guy what he wants, and if it gets serious, we'll do something, right? And it did get serious, and they did do something, but the question is that would it have been better if they shut him down earlier? Right? Would it have been better to say, okay, Hitler, you're violating the terms of Treaty of Versailles, you're arming yourself, you've militarized the Rhineland, unacceptable, stop or else.
But like as you said before, like China might be in Russia. If both of them come together, everybody's screwed.
I think, yeah, and I think that China definitely supports Russia, but again, I don't think, China's not going to sacrifice itself for Russia. Russia's not the stronger power here. China is. So, and Xi Jinping is a smart guy, I think, and he's not going to do like Germany did in World War I, where they're like, yeah, we'll support you, no problem. Xi Jinping's not going to pledge his unconditional support for no reason, right? Because if Russia wants to go to war over Ukraine, I think Xi Jinping might kind of help out a little, behind the scenes, but I don't think he's prepared to go to battle for this. He's gonna wait. He's gonna wait until he's gonna do what he's gonna do what China needs done. He doesn't really care about Russia, but I think he supports Russia. Okay, David, what do you think? You agree with this or not?
I think I agree with it.
You think you agree with it? Why do you say that?
It's also a strong country in the northmost. We need to, like you said, stand up and really expand
see that.
Like, if we start a war, then there are no side win. Then
True, right? Wars are. Nobody was in my social or my comparative cultures class last term. Was anyone here? No. But to quote Ashoka, who was one of the early Mauryan Empire emperors in India, he says war is a tragedy for everyone, right? Everyone loses someone. Everyone suffers, right? And so yeah, a war is an awful thing, right? But another question is it useful sometimes, right? The other thing we'll take a break here in just a minute, but the other thing I'll ask you is that can you be on the fence about this, right? So the argument is we need to align with our NATO allies and oppose Russia. I said, do you agree or not, right? And so some of you said yes, some of you said no, but can you be neutral in this argument? Can you be neutral? Can you take no side?
Yes.
You can?
Everyone, actually,
Can you be neutral?
like not taking sides, whether like the Ukraine side or the Russian side.
Well, what I'm saying, I'm saying it specifically to this argument, because the argument is saying we need to stand up, right? And so the question is, stand up to Russia or not? Can we be neutral somehow?
No.
No? Why not?
I mean, if I side with not oppose to Russia,
Yeah.
there's it's everything is uncertain right now. So
Yeah.
like just going like not like taking sides, like one or two sides. There's still too many uncertain things, so I wouldn't risk it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's true. There is a lot of uncertain things. Some of the uncertainty might even be around what Putin is trying to do, right? What's his end game here? What's his goal, right? Does he want control of Ukraine? Does he want Ukraine just not to join NATO? What is he trying to do, right? And even that's a little bit in doubt. We're not even sure about what his goal is.
It just doesn't like
Maybe. Kind of my point here is that, the argument is basically do something or do nothing. What should we do? And if you say, well, I'm neutral, right? I'm not going to take a side. You kind of are taking a side, aren't you? Because if you don't stand up, if you're not standing up to Putin, if you're not standing up to Russia, if you're not opposing them, then you're kind of choosing the other side, right? Because there's no way to say, oh, I'm neutral, because neutral is you're not going to do anything. And the other side of the argument is we're not going to do anything either, right? So if you don't make a decision on this, you are making a decision on this, right? Doing nothing is the other side of it. Are we going to stand up to the bully, or are we going to let him do what he wants? And if you say, oh, I'm neutral, I'm not going to get involved, you're letting the bully do what he wants, right? So in a way, you can ignore this, right? You can not pay attention to the conflict. You can, look at other things on your phone and just kind of pretend nothing's happening, which is what they did in Europe in 1938 or 7 or whatever. You can pretend it's not happening and you can ignore it, but you are taking a side, right? You are kind of choosing to do nothing. And again, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, because everybody has to make up their own mind about this, but I'm just saying that in situations like this, there's kind of no way to be neutral, right? Because you're either, at least when it's framed this way, you're either in support of resisting Russia's pressure and saying, look, Russia, you can't push around another country, you can't invade them, you can't tell them what to do, back off, right? Either you're in favor of that or you're not, but if you're not in favor of that, you're not really doing anything, which is the same as just ignoring the whole situation, right? So again, sometimes you can be for, sometimes you can be against, sometimes you can be neutral, but some arguments kind of require you to take a side, right? Are you for racism or against it, right? And if you're not against it, you're kind of just letting it continue, right? And so is there a big difference between being for racism and just letting people be racist? Not much, right? There's not much difference between that. And so, again, I think there are people out there who think that, oh, we'll just remain neutral. Maybe a country like India, right? Maybe India is saying, oh, we're just going to stay out of it. But really, staying out of it is allowing Russia to have its way, right? You're saying that Russia is allowed to intimidate Ukraine and tell them what to do, maybe even invade them and take parts of their country. That's okay, right? And that's not neutral, right? That's pro-Russia, right? And so again, I'm not trying to convince you of necessarily one way or the other, and I'm not suggesting that, yeah, I have my own opinion, of course, but I'm not trying to push one or the other on you. But yeah, there some questions and some situations require you to take a side. And if you claim that you're not taking a side, you kind of are, right? There's no, you're either voting yes or you're voting no. And if you don't vote at all, you're kind of voting no anyway, right? Okay, want to take a little break? Okay, let's take a break. This is too much deep thought, right? Okay, and we're back. So, David, to answer your question about Russia and Ukraine, to the best of my understanding, I'm no expert. I'm not a foreign policy expert. To the best of my understanding, Russia it's okay. Ukraine used to be a part of the Soviet Union. Okay, so when the Soviet Union kind of appeared, they took over Ukraine. It was part of the USSR for decades, and then when the Soviet Union kind of fell apart, Ukraine became an independent country. Since then, Ukraine has always been it's kind of sat on the border between the Russian world and the European world. And so it's been a democracy for a long time, but in some cases it's been a corrupt democracy. But it's kind of gone back and forth. Most of the Ukrainians, I think, see themselves as separate from Russia. They view themselves as their own ethnic group. They have their own language. There are some pro-Russia Ukrainians, but I think most Ukrainians think of themselves as, well, they have a sense of nationalism, right? They feel that the Ukrainian people are a people. They're not the same as the Russians, and they want their own country, and they want to determine they want to make their own decisions, right? They don't want Russia telling them what to do. And so Ukraine has always been kind of on the edge of two worlds, right? And so Ukraine, I think, has switched back and forth. Sometimes they've leaned a little closer to Russia. Sometimes they've leaned toward the West. But Russia has always been kind of fearful of having too much Western influence too close to them. And so they either want Ukraine as kind of a buffer between the Western world, or they just want to make sure that they have control of Ukraine. They don't want to see Ukraine go and ally itself too closely with the West. But of course, that's what NATO represents, right? Is a military alliance with Western Europe and with the US and Canada. And so, Russia definitely doesn't want Ukraine joining NATO. And one of the things they're asking for is that NATO say that Ukraine can never join. That's one of their demands. I think that in Putin's little fantasy dreams at night, I think he dreams that the Soviet Union has all of the territory back, or that Russia has all the territory that the Soviet Union lost. I think he fantasizes about that a little bit. I don't think he'll ever be able to reclaim all the republics that were part of the Soviet Union, but I think he kind of secretly dreams that. And so I think, yeah, he would, if it was up to him, I think he would like to have the Ukraine as part of Russia again. I don't think he can get it without a lot of cost, but I think for now he would be happy to just have control over it and to keep it from joining NATO. But again, I can't read the man's mind. I don't know what he's trying to do, but that's their history of Russia and Ukraine. So we'll see what happens. But again, to drive home the last point, we have an argument here, right? There's other arguments out there about doing other things or maybe not doing anything, about not getting involved. But one of my points here is that, there's a point where you kind of can't not take a side, right? Because you're either going to oppose what's happening here or you're going to let it happen, right? And it's the same thing with Hitler, right? When Hitler rolls into Poland in 1939 and invades, the question is, are you going to stand up and stop this, or are you going to let it happen? There's no way to be neutral, right? If you say you're neutral, you're letting it happen, right? You have to choose a side, right? And maybe you don't have to choose a side here, but in some ways you do, right? You're either going to stand up and hold people accountable to international law, or you're not going to do that, right? And you can explain why any way you want to, but some issues only have two sides, right? You're either for or against. Is this one of them? I'll leave that for you to decide. Is it comparable to what happens in Europe with Hitler? Is there a, clearly Vladimir Putin is not Hitler, right? We can say that, but is this a similar situation? Can we actually compare these things? A bit, right? We have, well, how are these situations similar?
Like Hitler wanted to control everything.
Yeah. Hitler? Or not Hitler? Putin?
Yeah.
Heck no.
No, like, what I forgot the other one. The other side.
Other side of what?
Like he's in control of everything. He wants control of everything.
Faces?
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
Faces? Is he a faces?
Oh, a fascist.
Oh, yeah.
No. Is Putin a fascist?
Yeah.
No. Putin is an authoritarian. So he's a kind of a dictator, but he uses his power through a democracy that he kind of controls. So Russia, from the outside might look like a democracy, but it's really not. He's the one controlling it and pulling the strings. He's not really a fascist. He's more of, well, he's kind of descended from the authoritarian Soviet leaders, right? So Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, he's kind of descended from them. So he's a communist dictator that doesn't have a communist country anymore. He has a market, he has a capitalist economy, but he's still acting like one of those old Soviet dictators or authoritarians. So not really a fascist, but he's one guy. So yeah, he's not comparable to Hitler in that he's not a fascist, right? But he is a single leader, right, who has most of the power, right? He has this desire to control other countries, or maybe to invade them, or to take pieces of them. How else is this similar? How else?
Strong countries, business.
What's that?
The strong countries, business.
Okay, so there are strong countries kind of involved in this, and it's kind of a challenge to other countries, right? Putin is kind of breaking the rules here, and he's saying, this is what I want, right? I want you to, not admit NATO as a member, or not admit the Ukraine as a member of NATO. I want you to do this and this. I'm getting my troops all ready to go. What are you going to do about it, right? And so he's kind of challenging the West, right? And again, this goes back to that idea of you kind of have to take a side, right? When somebody challenges you, right? Think about maybe the schoolyard bully, okay? If somebody challenges you to a fight, you can't really be neutral, right? You can either say, okay, man, let's go, and start fighting with them, or you can decline the challenge. But there's no way to kind of get out of that situation, right? Somebody's challenged you, you can either accept the challenge or you can back down, but you can't be neutral. And that's what Vladimir Putin has done. He's challenged Western countries. He's like, I'm going to do this. Are you going to go along with it or not? Right? And Western countries have the choice of either not going along with it or letting him have it, right? Letting him do what he wants. There's kind of no way to weasel out of it, right? There's no way to comfortably back out. Yeah, but it's kind of similar in that way to Europe as well, right? Because Hitler was kind of doing that to the Western European nations, right? He threw the Treaty of Versailles out the window and said, I'm going to do whatever I want, right? I'm going to rebuild the military. I'm not paying you anymore. Our debts are canceled. I'm uniting with Austria. Try and stop me. So he kind of challenged them, right? He broke the rules and nobody held him to account. They backed down, right? Britain and France backed down. And so, yeah, so Hitler's not, or Putin's not a fascist, but he is an authoritarian. He is breaking the rules and he is challenging, he's issuing a challenge to Western countries. I'm doing this. Are you going to stop me or are you going to go along with it?
Why didn't anyone do anything on the part of Ukraine in 2015?
It's a good question. When Russia took part of Ukraine in was it 2015? Or are you just saying what I said?
Yeah.
Okay. Why didn't anyone do anything? Well, it's a good question. Countries like the US and Canada imposed economic sanctions on Russia, which seem to have had some effect, but not enough, right? They don't seem to have been strong enough, or they don't seem to have hurt Russia in the way that maybe the US hoped that it would. But other than that, that's kind of all they did. And so, we could probably say, and maybe this is another way in which it's comparable, is that now, and the same as in 2015, or whatever it was, countries have their own things to worry about, right? They have economies and elections and things to deal with at home. Wars are expensive. Nobody wants to fight them because they're awful. And it was, unfortunately, the answer is probably it was just easier to just let him get away with it, right? It wasn't a lot of Ukraine. It was a small area. It probably would have been a big deal to fight with Russia. Russia's a nuclear power, right? You don't want to start a fight with a nuclear power lightly, right? That's a big deal. And so I think the idea was it was just easier to let him take it. It was easier to appease him at the time. But now, just like the third premise, right? Appeasement in order to avoid conflict only leads to more serious conflict around the corner. We appeased him years ago. We let him take that section of Ukraine. And here we are 6 years later. And he's moving his troops into position outside of Ukraine, right? Now we have a more serious situation, right? And if we let him get away with this, if we let him do whatever he wants, if we bow to his demands, is there going to be an even more serious situation in another 5 years? And then what, right? Every time we fail to stand up, the stakes get higher and it gets more dangerous. It's more destructive, right? And again, the same thing with Hitler, right? We're going to read about this shortly, but he moved his military into the Rhineland. He united with Austria, right? He took the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. He took that. Then he took the rest of Czechoslovakia, right? And then finally he moved in and took Poland, right? And that's when Britain and France say, okay, now we got to get into this. But as we know, that's a whole world war, right? That's 4 years of destruction that they get into. Would it have been better if they just intervened immediately and said, none of this crap, Hitler. Like, you're not tearing up the treaty, follow it or else, right? And maybe there would have been a war, but it probably would have been a smaller one, right? Maybe. It's hard to know. But again, we have this same situation, right? We appeased Vladimir Putin in 2015. Here we are again, right? Dealing with his aggression, with Russia's aggression. If we don't do anything now, what's going to be the next thing, right? What if the next thing is China trying to take Taiwan? Then what? Are we going to let that go? or are we going to stand up? Because China sees Taiwan as part of itself, right? China thinks that Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan and the West, they feel that they're an independent country. They're not part of China. So if Xi Jinping wants Taiwan, if he wants control of Taiwan, are we going to let him have it? Or are we going to stand up? Right? And if we don't stand up here, are we going to stand up there? And if we don't stand up there, are we just going to let people do whatever they want? Right? Are we going to let people, influence and control and invade other countries with no response? Right? And if we are, I guess that's fine, but what's going to be the consequence of that? Right? That's worth pointing out, right? If you don't stand up to a bully today, what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And the next day? And also what's going to happen to other kids, right? If nobody stands up to the bully will terrorize everybody. Right? And again, I don't want to, I have views on this. You can probably guess what my views are, but I don't want to push it on you, but I do want to ask the question, when, do we have a responsibility to stand up? And if so, when? And again, maybe you might think that no, it's not our problem. And that's okay. But as long as you understand why you think that and you've thought through what the consequences are. Right? That's all I'm saying. Okay, that went on a little long. What's that? I know, right? The world is a serious place, right? And again, what's that? It is so complex, right? But again, and it's much easier for us to be distracted, right? It's much easier to focus on our Netflix series or whatever. I know I like to, right? Or focus on our kind of personal lives and not pay attention to this stuff. And sometimes we can, but this is important stuff, right? And it will have an effect on our lives whether you ignore it or not. Right? And so I'm sorry to do a reality check today. I apologize. I apologize for bringing reality into the room here. Yeah. So, okay. Maybe the last thing I'll do really, really quickly here is talk a bit about, where we'll switch gears, we'll leave this Ukraine thing. We'll talk about Nazi propaganda, okay? Now, what's propaganda? What is propaganda? Have you heard the word before? Yeah? What is it? Yeah, you can Google it if you want. Yeah, Google it. Google propaganda, tell me what it says. Do you know it? What does it say?
To promote particular political or
Right. So it has a political kind of message to it. It's usually produced by governments, not always, but usually. And it's meant to convince people of a certain thing or make them feel a certain way. Okay? So propaganda can have a bunch of different functions. There was lots of propaganda going around during both the First and Second World War, and both sides used it, right? So here on the Allied side of World War I, we were using propaganda to make the enemy seem horrible, right? We had all these, I wish I had some posters for you, maybe I'll show them to you tomorrow, making the Germans look like horrible monsters, right? To inspire our soldiers to go and fight against them, right? Because they were so evil, right? There was propaganda kind of convincing you how heroic going to war was, right? To try and convince people to go to war. And so governments use propaganda to try to make the people feel the way they want them to feel, right? And again, both sides do it. You know, the Nazis are really good at it, but here in the West, we've used it a little bit. We've used it as well, right? But Hitler was very good, and he says here, sorry, this should be in quotes or something, but in order to control a population, you must first control the population's minds, right? You need to control, for social justice people, you need to control social messaging, right? You need to control what people are consuming, what messages they absorb. And again, Hitler knew this and was very good at it. Let me show you, yeah, this is what he said. This is from Mein Kampf, his book. He says, propaganda is a means to an end. Its purpose is to lead the people to an understanding that will allow it to go willingly and without resistance, devote itself to the tasks and goals of superior leadership, right? Propaganda's job is to make people do what we want them to do. That's what it does, okay? It's not just information, it's trying to convince you of something. Just like an argument, but in a more slippery fashion, okay? Here's some Nazi propaganda. I'm gonna turn the light out just so you can see it better. Here's some Nazi propaganda. And so you can see here, this is a fundraising poster for the Nazis. A member of Hitler Youth asks for money to build youth hostels and homes. Ah, that's nice, isn't it? Isn't that sweet? So here we have this young Nazi girl, and how does this feel? How's it supposed to make you feel? Forget everything you know about the Nazis for a minute. Yeah, there's a kindness here, right? Doesn't that girl look sweet? Yeah, she looks like a very sweet, wholesome girl. She's collecting money to build shelters for youth. It's a really compassionate thing to do, right? So here we have, you know, the Nazis doing things for the community, right? Supporting youth, raising money. And here's this young girl who looks very, you know, very smiley, very, you know, kind of wholesome and friendly. Yeah, and we get this kind of warm, fuzzy feeling, right? Oh, that sounds like a great thing to do, right? Again, put aside everything you know about the Nazis. It's hard to see something like that and feel good about it, right? But yeah, we get a feeling from this, right? Similarly, we get a feeling from this poster as well, right? German students fight for the Führer and for the people, right? How's this one supposed to make us feel? Proud, glory. Gina, what do you think? Are you fading? Time for lunch? Ryan, what do you think? How are you supposed to feel when you look at this? Encouraging? Yeah, right? There's a lot of pride here. It's kind of encouraging students to be like this, right? Look at this handsome, heroic, brave young man, right, with the Nazi flag, standing up, fighting for the people. How nationalistic, how proud, right? A lot of things are, you know, being communicated here, right? To the student. The students fight for the Führer and for the people, right? Again, there's not a lot of patriotism here, right? We're not talking about Germany as a country. We're talking about the German people, and we're talking about its leader, right? How about this one? What's being communicated to us here?
Not afraid.
Who's not afraid? This guy? Yeah, he looks quite. What's the look on his face? How'd you describe that? He looks like a god. Why do you say that?
Because they see
Yeah, right? It's almost like the heavens have opened up and they're shining directly on Hitler, right? It's almost like God himself is saying, "This is my chosen leader," right? Yeah. Look, what's the look on his face? Kind of like,
Like fearless or angry.
yeah, he's definitely fearless. Maybe even a little bit of anger, determination, right? I'm going to do this, whatever it is. Well, we know what it is, but yeah. What else do we see in here? What's behind him?
His people.
Yeah, right? It looks like the entire German nation is behind him, right? Carrying Nazi flags, marching behind their brave, determined leader, right? Who seems to be ordained by the heavens, right? But again, you laugh, but that's kind of that's the message that's being transmitted, right? People are absorbing this message. Also, note that there are no German flags here, right? The Nazi symbol has replaced the German flag, right? And their ideology has replaced everything else, right? They have become the state. They are greater than the state. Yeah, what about this one? This is the last one we'll look at today. The Nsdap, so the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. The Nazi Party protects the people. Your fellow comrades need your advice and help, so join the local party organization. Join the Nazis, right? What are you supposed to feel here? What do you see? Yeah, the family looks cozy, right? It's a very wholesome looking family, right? Maybe farmers, would you say? Yeah, a very wholesome, traditional farming family. 3 kids, right? A little baby, mom and dad. Everybody looks happy and loving, don't they? Yeah, right? Look at that little girl. She looks really happy too. And then, what's over top? What's the eagle representing here? What's that? Yeah, it's protecting the family. And what is it symbolically? Yeah, right? It's the Nazi Party protecting the family. And look at that eagle. Does that eagle look like something you want to mess around with? Nope. That's a mean-looking bird right there. So, yeah, you're seeing this again, right? The wholesome German family, right? So loving, so tender, and over top of it, something fierce that's protecting them, right? So again, he's very good at generating stuff like this, right? And there's more, but I'll show it to you tomorrow because we're fresh out of time. So that was really good. I'm glad we got through that article. I know it kind of took a long time and there was a lot of questions and it was heavy, but we did a good job. And we need to be able to do that, right? We need to be able to read stuff like that and say, okay, what are they asking us to believe here, and should we believe it, right? And again, if we go along with it, good, and if we don't, also good, as long as we understand what's being communicated, right? Okay, that's all for today. Pack it up. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, World War II. Yes, World War II. What? Not another war? That's what Europe said probably too. They're like, ugh, this again?